and welcome to an all-new weekly edition of Perspectives. I'm Deacon Pedro. Today we continue celebrating Consecrated Life, and to help us, I am joined by Father Michael Pace, a Salesian of Don Bosco. Father Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Deacon Pedro. Very happy to be here.
Did you always think or know that you were going to be a priest?
Probably at some level, yes, but I never wanted to admit it. As a child, I just...
Okay, wait, tell me about that.
I remember being a child and praying, as my parents taught me, at night before I went to bed. I had a sense that the Lord was calling me to that, but I never wanted to take it seriously. I always wanted to be married, have at least 4 kids.
Okay.
At least 4 kids. At least 4.
Four kids. Okay.
Yep. And so I went to university, did my language degree at St. Mike's here in Toronto, and then I pursued my law degree, got called to the bar after doing my articles with a litigation firm, and it was in that final phase of sort of professional formation that I realized what I thought had been there for so many years was in fact true, and I stopped being afraid to really look the Lord in the face and hear what he was telling me, and this is how I got here.
So what is that fear that I think a lot of people go through when they're getting the call?
Right.
What do you think that's from?
I think for me it was the fear of not doing what seemed most normal for most men. To get married, to have a wife, to have children, to earn money, to be a professional. Somehow, in my understanding, to be a priest or religious was more about sacrifice than fully developing who I am as a man in God's image.
Right.
And when I stopped being afraid to explore what it really meant to be a priest and a consecrated religious, I actually found my deepest joy in that. And it was really a wonderful way to let the Lord really make me over from the inside out and help me to see myself anew in His terms, in His love, and that made all the difference.
Why the Salesians?
The Salesians, when they came to my parish, I was in university, and there was just something different about them. There was the way they reached out to young people to draw them into the parish life that was fresh. There was a sense of joy that I really appreciated. There was their community dynamic. You never saw a more mismatched bunch of guys. And yet there was a joy in the way they lived together and in the way they led their youth apostolates. They were at that time running Don Bosco High School in Etobicoke. And I got involved with them there in their retreat programs and in their various liturgical activities, and I got to know them in their home life, in their community.
Right.
I just felt very at home.
Right. So but you didn't know, you were not familiar with the Salesians until you were in university.
When I heard that St. Benedict's was getting Salesians, I thought it was a disease. Well, what's that? I never heard of them, and I humbly admit I never even heard of Don Bosco until I was in my 20s.
Interesting.
And the rest is history.
Interesting. Now, when you met the Salesians, were already thinking about the priesthood?
Not really.
That still part of that?
No, I was in university. I remember Brother Bernie at the time asking me to get involved with his developing youth ministry in the first stages in the parish.
Right.
And I just said, listen, I got things to do. I'm busy, sorry, ask somebody else. And then when I started warmed up a little bit to the idea, I thought, what are you guys doing? Like with all these ping pong tables and soccer tables, let's get these kids some Bibles, let's get them Jesus.
Yeah.
I didn't know really anything about youth ministry and the way to create an atmosphere where kids feel at home.
Right. So
they could open to the deeper messages of faith. So I learned a lot, and I gradually stopped resisting what really were genuine invitations. They saw something in me, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I finally just said, okay, let's see where this is going.
Now, did you look at other religious congregations, or did you consider diocesan priesthood?
I did indeed. On the advice of my spiritual director at the time, Father Frank Kelly, I did do the diocesan come and see weekend, and it was a wonderful weekend. It was rich, it was prayerful, it was deep. And what it confirmed for me was that my place in God's sort of vocational landscape was to be a priest as a Salesian.
Interesting.
I loved the diocesan experience, but I didn't feel that was my place. I had a lot of spiritual direction that was a Jesuit spirituality, and that helped.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I certainly had different currents of spirituality exposed to me. But it's where I felt most at home.
Right. So what is the charism of the Salesians, or of Don Bosco, who's the founder?
Okay. Maybe I could answer that by telling a little dream that Don Bosco had. I think it's a wonderful way to start. I have a dream. It's not mine, it's his. And it was really programmatic of his life. He was only 9 years old, and he had a dream of a field outside his little home in Becky, the part of the countryside where he lived outside of Turin. And there were a bunch of boys, and they were fighting, and they were swearing, and they were being very rough together, and he wants to make them stop. So he jumps in to the fray and kind of tries to beat them into obedience. At which point a very majestic man appears and says, no, no, not like that. You will never win over your friends with violence. You have to be humble and kind. To which little Johnny says, well, who are you? My mom told me never to speak to strangers unless she gives me permission. And he says, well, I'm the son of the one your mother taught you to pray to 3 times a day. At that point, this majestic woman appears. And she says, Johnny, look at the kids. And all of a sudden, they become so many wild animals ripping each other apart. And then she says, look again. And they become gentle lambs, bleating joyfully, welcoming this man and this woman. At which point, he begins to cry and says, I am so confused. What is going on here? She says, in due time, you will understand. Your job will be to teach them the ugliness of sin and the beauty of virtue. And in time, all will be clear. You need to make yourself humble, steadfast, and strong. So that's 9 years old. He tells his family, they all dismiss it. He understood the dream only when he was 72 years old. After he had completed the construction of the Sacred Heart Basilica in Rome at the request of Pope Pius IX, he was saying Mass at one of the side altars, and the Mass took him 2 hours to finish because he kept breaking down in tears as he remembered that dream that had been fulfilled throughout his life. And so the essence of Don Bosco's charism then is to make the focus of our lives the young people. You know, so we give our life to the young, to the point where, modeled on Jesus, we have to be prepared to give our lives even for the young, to go to that extent of sacrifice for the good of young people.
So it's all about youth ministry.
Well, broader than youth ministry. I mean, certainly youth ministry is one big component of it. The objective is to create relationships where the young people know that they are loved. And in that experience of trust, to then guide them, to accompany them into a life-giving relationship with Jesus. We speak a lot about the Salesian youth spirituality, which would be essentially a life of friendship with Jesus, lived in communion with the church. He had a strong devotion to the Pope and the Magisterium, deepened and nourished by the sacraments, pillars of his method, frequent Holy Communion and the sacrament of confession, which is a beautiful thing. Devotion to our Blessed Mother, and all of that coming together to help the young people become protagonists of their own lives and agents of positive change in society. So a life then focused on service in the name of Jesus.
So his name is John Bosco. Where does the word Salesian come from?
Yes, that's a good question. Salesian comes from saying, no, we're not Bosconians. He deliberately did not want his name out of humility to be in the name of the order that he founded. So he grew up in the Turin area, which was, at that time, Italy was just coming together as a modern state. That was the Kingdom of Savoy, which extended from the northwest of Italy into the south of France. Francis de Sales was the patron of that kingdom. And so he would be to that part of Italy in those days, let's say what Saint Andre would be for Canadians, sort of a local faith hero. And so, St. Francis de Sales, who was known for his loving kindness, for his clear but gentle teachings. And so Don Bosco took him as the patron. So Francis de Sales is the basis of the word Salesian. There are, on the big tree, if you want, of religious families, of consecrated communities, a number of groups that grow from the branch connected directly to Francis de Sales, and then so many more that grew out of the Don Bosco Salesian tradition.
Right, so which is why you're a Salesian
of Don Bosco. That's the popular name for our congregation. The official name is the Society of St. Francis de Sales. That's our canonical title.
Right. Now, and there's a female branch?
There is, Le Figlie di Maria Auxiliatrice.
Okay, so that's why it's FMA.
FMA, Daughters of Mary Help of Christians, commonly known as the Salesian Sisters.
Okay. But it's the same charism, same...
Yes, so when Don Bosco was doing his work with the poorest of the boys in the Turin area, he met Mary Domenica Mazzarello, who was doing a similar work for girls. And so they co-founded this order that was intended to be, in Don Bosco's heart and mind, a living testimony to Mary, Help of Christians. And so that they would reach out to the female contingency in a similar spirit that Don Bosco was doing for the boys.
Right. Now, you were telling me earlier about your logo. Maybe just to kind of bring all those elements together.
Right. When Don Bosco began his work in the part of Turin called Valdoco, he established his first oratory. Okay? No, not a laboratory as the history goes, an oratory, a place of prayer, which was different from other settings in his day. There were 4 essential components that comprised that growthful atmosphere where young people and spirituality thrived in a way that people hadn't seen before. So the components were, first of all, a playground that welcomes, the youth ministry piece.
Yeah.
Okay, a playground that welcomes. Kids have to play. Kids have to recreate. Kids have to express their creativity. There's the home that welcomes. Remember, he was working in early industrial revolution Turin, a huge uprooting of the whole social fabric, where young people were often orphaned because their parents were working in the cities, the kids were abandoned to their own.
Yeah.
So a home that welcomes them. Then a school that educates. Schooling, education as a means out of poverty, as a way of creating, in Don Bosco's words, honest citizens and upright Catholics. The connection was very, very clear. And then finally, a church that evangelizes. So the playground, the school, the home, and the church are symbolized by the building-looking structure in the logo, which represents each of those components. And then you could also see almost 3 stick figures. It could be the Trinity, it could be Don Bosco and the young people, it could be a classroom, student and teachers, it could be a family, parents and children.
Good. All the elements coming
They're
together.
there, the Oratorian criteria, we call them.
We're going to take a little break. It's that time already, but don't go too far away because we're going to continue our conversation with Father Michael Pace, a Salesian of Don Bosco. When we get back, we're going to ask him what he has to say about consecrated life. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Perspectives on Consecrated Life. I'm Deacon Pedro. We're speaking with Father Michael Pace, a Salesian of Don Bosco. This is a big year for Salesians.
This is a big
200th anniversary of the birth of John Bosco.
Right.
John
His
Bosco.
name is John. Don is the Italian title
Yes.
for father, if you will, a respectful name.
Yes. So what is the significance of this anniversary for you?
Well, so 1815 to 2015, 200 years. It's really a time for us to certainly revisit our history, to understand it better, because the more you know your roots, the greater the sense of unity and identity and purpose.
Okay.
As we move forward, we need to be true to the charism, the gift of the Spirit that God unleashed for the church through Don Bosco.
Yeah.
How do we incarnate that charism today? Faithful to our history, but ever responsive to the needs of today. And so certainly this is a build-up of study and celebration and gratitude around the Salesian world on the occasion of Don Bosco's birth. It's a time for us really to refocus.
So but what do you do? Are you having like conferences or special retreats to help you refocus? How does that work?
There are many at the level of local or international animation. There are retreat days, there are study days, there are celebrations, there are masses to commemorate his birth.
Yeah.
And for us as a worldwide congregation, one of the biggest events took place last year. I was there last year at this time for our 27th General Chapter. And that was an important time for us to take stock of who we are as sons of Don Bosco today. And if I could just read a quote from that document that really challenges us to refocus who we are and why we are Salesian. And this is from our current Rector Major, Father Angel Fernandez. He said this: "This is the challenge of religious life today, thinking and living in a way that refocuses our way of looking at reality where we are too certain of ourselves." And so the challenge in that is to, even if I pick up another line from our Rector Major, he says, the young, especially the poorest ones, are the ones who will save us.
Yeah.
We are certainly called by God to form communities focused on the Lord, to go out on mission. But our perspective has to be gratitude that the young people we reach out to in service are actually God's ways of helping us to save our own souls, if you will.
Yeah, it's very interesting. A couple of different thoughts I have, but that reminds me of a story I heard about Pope John Paul II, when he was asked why he started World Youth Day, thinking that it's the bishops who go and evangelize the youth, and he said, no, it's the youth who evangelize the bishops, which is the same idea.
Trust is there, yeah.
Now, the first quote you read uses the word renewal. So, is this anniversary an opportunity for renewal in the true sense of the word?
Absolutely. It's been an occasion for us to. I give you perhaps the three areas of focus that we gave ourselves at the chapter, which was very much echoed by the call to this year of consecrated life.
Yeah.
We reflected on the need to be mystics in the Spirit, prophets of fraternity, and servants to the young. So essentially, mystics in the Spirit, how do we give God primacy of place in our lives? That is the essential thing. So our own spirituality. From the Pope on down, we've been challenged, and I think bravely recognizing what can be, Pope Francis called it the disease of superficiality. How do we take stock of where that might have affected us personally and as a congregation to regain that, or to give back to God what we promised when we encountered Him as our first love, that beautiful image. How do we give Him primacy of place and allow the power of the Spirit to renew us in that constant conversion, and from that to do what we do. And then to be prophets of fraternity in an age that is challenged by isolationism and relativism and loneliness. How can we, by the way we live together as a community, be prophets of that mystery of unity that is the Holy Trinity itself?
So prophet meaning a witness?
A witness, yeah.
To other people?
To ourselves first. And then from that, out of the abundance of your heart flows the rest. And so from the way we live together and work together, how do we then remind the world that we are called to that communion, a way of incarnating the mystery of the Trinity itself in the relationships. And then the third piece, to be servants of the young. Not masters of the young, but they're servants. How do we become like Jesus, who went out to the existential peripheries, to quote Pope Francis, where the young are most challenged? How do we reflect on the genius of Don Bosco's pedagogy, reason, religion, and kindness? How do we take the pillars of his method and breathe new life into it?
Now, you made me think, and of course we're talking about consecrated life in general, but those three principles, if I can call them that, at least especially the first two, putting God first, being witness with our fraternity. Would you say that that's part of living a consecrated life?
It's at the heart of it. It's at the heart of it.
For everyone who's living consecrated life, or specifically?
Those are the words that we've put on it. But if you take the documents of the Church since Vatican Council II, Lumen Gentium chapter 6, if you take Perfecta Caritatis, if you take Vita Consacrata, if you take
because we've read all of those.
Of course you have, in Latin, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Starting afresh from Christ, the threads are so consistent.
Okay.
It struck me the words overlap. There's almost a parallel in wording. Now, I don't know where I put it here, but where we spoke about mystics, prophets, and missionaries, living the past with gratitude and the present with passion, and embracing the future with hope. The aims of this year of consecrated life and our priorities as Salesians really mesh. You really see the web, if you want, of church wisdom coming forward and drawing us into the life of the church precisely as consecrated people.
Now, you as Salesians are doing this refocusing, I guess, anyway, because it's the anniversary, but in a way the Holy Father calls a year like the year of consecrated life for that same purpose.
Absolutely.
For all people in consecrated life to renew,
to renew, yes, because ever since the Vatican Council II call to reconnect with our history so we can know the charism better, so we can keep this gift of the Lord, of God present and vibrant in the church. That's the hope, to refix our gaze with the contemplative intensity on Jesus. You see? And from that, first be converted on an ongoing way, and to respond courageously to what needs to be done. One of the images that's been used so often is that consecrated people need to be sentinels of the dawn.
Yes.
I love that image because I think it speaks well to me as a Salesian and to all consecrated people of the role we play within the bigger people of God. We're not apart from all members of the baptized body of Christ. What does a sentinel do? The sentinel kind of keeps vigil when other people may be asleep.
So a watchman.
A watchman, a watchwoman.
Yeah.
But to what end? For the good of the broader community. The sentinel needs to report what is seen. It might be good news, all is fine. It might be disturbing news, there are challenges on the horizon.
Right.
And so to see the reality that we're called to be a part of, and bringing the primacy of God's love for us to bear on our vision for the world, and the activities that we choose to be a part of as a way of vehicling that presence of God in and for the world.
Right, which is prophetic in a sense. How, because I'm going to ask you, what is consecrated life then?
Right.
But before I ask you that, aren't we all called to that?
Absolutely. Again, the universal call to holiness that
Yes.
the Vatican Council reminded us of in chapter 5 of Lumen Gentium. Let me say, this aside, was very much rooted in St. Francis de Sales. He spoke about that in his Introduction to the Devout Life in the 17th century.
Yes.
And in those days, it was radical.
Yes.
Because in those days, only the monks and bishops were holy.
Exactly.
And here he was saying, if you're a king or a soldier or a
Everyone.
homemaker or a carpenter, be holy your way. And so within that universal call to holiness, God will call some people to consecrated life not to be better or holier than others, but within the entire body of Christ to have a particularly focused commitment on the gospel message. See, what is it that makes a consecrated person a consecrated person? First of all, is to recognize that it's God who consecrates, not us. We don't consecrate ourselves to God.
Yeah.
He consecrates us all to himself through baptism. And then within that, some are consecrated by God for a particular role of spiritual animation, if you want, for the good of the church. Pope Francis spoke beautifully about consecrated life being born in the church, growing within the church, and being directed completely to the church. So the essence of consecration would be the public vows to live the evangelical counsels of poverty, obedience, and chastity modeled on Christ. Not as a sacrificial renunciation of all the beauty of being human, but as a way actually of finding our fullest humanity fulfilled with all the sacrifices that are entailed, but it's a fulfillment of who we are as we live out the vows.
Right.
And then that lived within a fraternal community. We don't live on our own, we live in community.
Right.
We live life in common. And even there, he spoke beautifully about, the need to give a soul to institutional structures. Structures by themselves won't guarantee a fraternal life. And so the whole conversation about the spirituality of communion, how we need that to give the soul to our institutional structures. Otherwise, we're just living in a hotel that's quite barren. And no one is going to be happy or impressed with that.
Of course.
And then the third component, after the evangelical councils and the fraternal life and community, is the apostolic mission. How is Jesus entrusting to us the very mission he came to live? How are we as Salesians being asked by the Spirit to continue that mission? And so the quote I began with about not being too satisfied with our current structures.
Right.
It's a huge challenge to pull religious out of the administrative roles of big schools and be present to accompany the young people as fathers, as big brothers, as mentors on their Emmaus walk with the Lord. How do we keep that contact meaningful in the way that Don Bosco did in that first oratory I described in Valdoco?
Yeah, of course.
You see, these are the challenges. How do we be fathers and brothers who are life-giving and not just managers of very successful schools or youth centers or orphanages, depending where we are in the world?
Which is why it's good to have a year like this year, not just the anniversary, but the year of Consecrated Life, to help us refocus.
For us, it's a tremendous convergence. You see the sense of humor of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
We have this timing of history with our own bicentennial celebrations of our founder, all of that within the broader church network, which is so Don Bosco. He was all about the church. He was all about solidarity with the Pope, all about the growing of God's kingdom, not his own little project.
Wow, this has been very educational, but we have to leave it there, Father Mike. Thank you so much for coming today.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Deacon.
And
Thank you.
schooling us. Lots to think about, so thank you for sharing
God
with us
bless you.
today.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Father Michael Pace. He's a Salesian of Don Bosco, and we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on anything that he said. Share with us your story, your vocation. Maybe you're living the consecrated life. Tell us what you think that means. Contact us via Facebook, facebook.com/saltandlighttv, or via Twitter @saltandlighttv. That's all for tonight. May God continue to bless you and your home.